Welcome back to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage, everybody. This video is a continuation of the last video you saw under the Restoration series. And the main theme of this video is not really the very nice, lovely black Singer 301A that you see in front of you, but I'm using it as an example of some of the method that I go through when I'm restoring a machine. As I mentioned in the first video, I typically, the first thing I want to do is get any dust or debris out of the machine. Now, sometimes you'll get a vintage machine, it'll have dust on the outside. That's actually not difficult to clean off. It's the dust that can be in different places in the machine. And so in the last video, I removed an amazing amount of dust bunnies out of the feed dog area. It hadn't been cleaned in a while. And found some stray threads that had gotten wrapped around the drive shaft. That is very common. That's not unusual. And if you ever have a machine that's not running as strong as you think it should after you've cleaned and oiled it, you might want to check for something like that. Probably should put that in the troubleshooting series. Anyway, so what I did was, of course, I cleaned any dust and debris. There was a little bit, not much, up here in the side compartment where the needle and presser bar are. And then I went and cleaned out the feed dog area, and then of course over here in the side where the bobbin case and shuttle are, took the bobbin case out and was cleaning out some dust over here. And then, as I mentioned before, looking underneath, we saw the underside when I was in the motor series. I showed how I go in and service the motors. And then last but not least, I come back in here, and this of course is the underside of the machine. And as I mentioned before, you want to save this for last in getting dust out of the way, because if you clean this area, and even worse, if you oil the area before you finish cleaning up above, you're just going to get more dust falling, and you're going to have to clean this again. And that's kind of silly. So anyway, I believe in the last video I went in here and just took care of any residual dust that might have been in there, and it's pretty much good to go now. Another area that I'm going to address, and it's not really about dust, and then I'll show you, I'm going to come back to this area here when it comes time to do the oiling procedure that I perform on sewing machine overhauls. So just as I mentioned, top to bottom, that's kind of a good way to remember that. Top to bottom, you take care of any dust. There's not really any dust on the very top because it's sealed with a lid. But you start in the uppermost part of the machine, the side. You work your way down to the feed dogs, to the shuttle, and then you come down and you want to take care of your dust. I'm going to approach this sewing machine the same way when it comes to lubrication, and I'll show you the products that I use, both grease and oil, and how I go about using them and why, and how much to use, which is not an unimportant point. So here you see the side of the Singer 301, and of course you have a plug area. This is for the power source, and then there's a plug area down here below, and that of course is for the foot pedal. All the Slant-O-Matic Singers, and this includes 300, 400, 500, and it may include the 600. I'll have to go back and check to be sure. They all have two different plugs. That's just how they were engineered. They work fine. Just something to know if you're new to this series. Let's see. So what else do I need to do now that I've gotten dust out of the way? I'm going to, in tandem with having the lid off the top of the machine, I'm now going to go and remove the hand wheel. And on these machines, the hand wheel removal is even faster than machines with belts because there's no belt. And of course, the first thing you want to do, I just was appreciating just how much beautiful chrome is on this clutch. So this, by the way, was a machine that was kept indoors all its life, and I can tell. Anyway, some of you may be brand new to these machines or vintage machines in general. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently loosen the set screw in my clutch. Every hand wheel on a sewing machine that has a bobbin winder, and though they do going back over 100 years, they have a clutch that's used to disengage the needle so you can wind a bobbin without your needle thrashing up and down. And of course, the one on the Singer is this. This is the clutch for the Singer 301. And I'm going to take my set screw and pull it out just a little bit more. In fact, I'll just remove it all together. And the clutch knob on this, by the way, your set screw on your clutch, it's kind of interesting. It has threads in the top, but it has a smooth shaft because it needs to be long enough to engage a giant washer, which is behind this knob. Now, this knob is unusually stiff. I rarely have an issue. There it came. This knob, by the way, is a very, very thick, sort of beefy piece of equipment. By the way, if this knob had not loosened with me just using hand pressure, I would not force it. Don't put vice grips and scratch it up. What you would want to do is go right behind with a drop of sewing machine oil and let it have time to loosen. You could use penetrant if it was that stiff. Some people will use hair dryers. I'd be careful with heat. You don't want to use too much. But anyway, it loosened. But don't be surprised if that happens on a vintage machine. And let's see if I can take the clutch knob off. It should come right out. It's kind of not a bad place to mention the fact that the Handwheel clutch system that's used for turning on and off the needle bar so you can wind a bobbin is a very simple and beefy part of the machine. And this system you see here, in this case the Singer's washer, is massive. These devices were very simple, very difficult to break. I've almost never really seen one break per se. I'm going to see if I can get a little behind my washer here and help me sort of wiggle it forward. I can tell that there's a layer of old oil on the threads here, so it's been there a while. Another thing I can do is simply pull on the Handwheel, which I was going to do anyway when the washer came out. So let's see if I can coax the little washer off here. The washer is not really threaded per se. It just kind of hangs on this drive shaft, and it does so with two specific teeth on the washer, and I'll show those to you. And if you look at the drive shaft, you'll see that it has, let's zoom in, you can get a little bit closer view. You can see that the drive shaft has notches, and those notches are where the little, I call them teeth, they're really sort of, they look like little gears, but they're not. My friends will be laughing at me. Normally these washers come right off, but I like you guys to see me when when something does not go as planned. I like that because people who are new to this are sometimes intimidated from working on a machine. They're afraid they might hurt the machine, and I don't want them to feel that way. This is turning into a comedy. The only time I'm funny is when I'm not trying to be. So it's doing this on purpose because it knows I'm making the video, but I'm not going to remake the video. That would be silly. By the way, this washer is not stuck. It's loose. It's just it may not have come off in a while. So this is just really a process of wiggling the washer toward me. But I promise it's normally not this involved. Those of you who have these, who have taken these off, will know that, and you will be. Oh well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take the Handwheel off with the washer, and it'll come off. Now, what's going on here? I say that the Handwheel has a gear. I'm going to zoom back out, and we're going to kind of get more of an aerial view for you all. Okay, I changed the angle for you all. If you look closely, you'll see this is, of course, the worm gear, or the top side of the Singer direct drive motor that you saw me overhauling in the last motor series video I did. And what you're noticing, of course, right here is a gear. This is the gear that's attached to the hand wheel, and it is called it's called Textilite is the brand name of the material. It was created by General Electric back in the day, and they hold up very well. In fact, I've been rather impressed. I've never had one. They can break if they're abused, but I've never had one break in all the years I've been doing these restorations. So, of course, this little clutch washer it's doing this on purpose because we're all on video here. But what you'll see is you'll notice I'm going to be wiggling the hand wheel. Now, it could be, I suspect, what I'm seeing here, when I see that color, that amber color, that's old grease and oil that's formed a varnish. So it's a little sticky, okay? And again, this is not uncommon for a machine of this age. Okay, everyone, I took 2 of these little tools and got behind that washer, and again, it wasn't frozen on there, it was just being a little sticky. It's got some old oil and grease in there. No harm, no foul. Oh, by the way, so you'll notice, let me hold this up for you all. Notice on the center of this big washer are 2 little, they look like gear teeth, and they of course fit in the notches of the drive shaft, and that, it just goes on just like that. The back side is, you'll notice the holes go into the washer, and on the front side there's these little areas are protrusions, and those always go out facing you. And now let's see how well this hand wheel wants to come off. And notice I'm being careful. I'm not pulling on it too aggressively, but just being patient and wiggling. And I've cleared, of course, the gear. The gear was not stopping it, just, there it came. And there you have the hand wheel of a Singer 301. And again, that is the old Textilite gear. Now, one of the reasons it was sticky was actually not the gear itself, but this surface here. And again, old oil and grease, they can act like a glue when a machine is old. Either they've just been old and never replenished, or sometimes machines get stored in places like attics. This one was not. I can tell that this one had a very cushy life, which is one of the reasons it's in such great shape. Now, I'm going to move the camera again for you all. Okay, folks, I'm going to give you a little zoom here, and I think you'll see what was holding that hand wheel in place. There is for lack of a better word, a shaft or an opening where, of course, the hand wheel goes in. And that old grease was acting, like I say, a little bit of a glue. Wasn't totally cemented there. Sometimes people will use little space heaters or hair dryers to try to get that stuff to loosen up. I normally don't have I seldom have problems with Singers. Singers were engineered with wider tolerances and spaces between their moving parts than are machines like Italian Neckies. But even a Singer can get a little sticky when it hasn't had its grease service, but of course we're going to fix that. So what am I doing? I'm going to be taking cotton swabs, and I'm going to be going in, I've dipped mine in a bit of the 91% rubbing alcohol to help. I'm not washing this out per se, but I just want to wipe out, and you can see the old grease. It's kind of a blackish color. It's been in there a while. It easily comes out, but I want to get that out of there, and I'm going to be adding new grease. One of the things, occasionally I find machines, it's kind of strange. Either the machine will have no grease at all and it'll be dry, or more often there's grease in a machine, but sometimes people put a lot of grease and they think more is better, and it's not. It actually creates a mess. It's not really good for the machine. So you want to remove, we're getting rid of the old grease just to get it out of the way, okay? Because I'm not going to do like I did with the bearing and use that 30 weight oil to soften it. Here, first of all, I can get access to it easily. It's not hard to access, and I'm going to come in here and I'm just, like I said, I'm coming up around, just looking for old grease that's sort of stuck up in this little I guess you call it a tube. Beautifully machined, by the way. If you ever clean one of these, if you have one, you'll see just the incredible quality of the machining. You know, I often gush over the quality of these old machines, and it's important to remember that I'm going to tilt the machine just a bit so I can see it. So hopefully it will match the camera angle you guys see. So I want to kind of look here and make sure I can get any grease that's up in the top area. You could miss it if you were just looking in the machine sideways. But what I was saying is, it's not just sewing machines that were made this way. I have old kitchen appliances, like I have an old toaster oven. Some of you may have these too. Some people use old vacuum cleaners. I have an old KitchenAid mixer. It's from the 1940s, and that thing still runs. It's waiting for an overhaul, by the way, so I'm not using it now. But my point here is that consumer items that our ancestors, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents used to purchase they were made so much better. They were made to last. And if something is a machine, it's made to last, it's made to be serviced. So, you know, it shouldn't surprise you to see access screws. But again, finding someone who knows how to repair these, that's the challenge. But if you can find someone to do that work for you, or if you decided to do it yourself, it can be rewarding when you realize that the quality of the past is pretty much gone. Now, luxury items today can still be had that are made well, but of course they're very expensive, and very few people are willing to pay for them. Okay, so I've cleaned out you know, all of the heavy old bolt grease that I can see. And now again, as with anything else on a sewing machine, be very conservative with the excuse me, with the use of solvent, in this case rubbing alcohol. I usually find that if I wet one of these cotton swabs, that they typically will hold on to the alcohol as long as I don't douse them. And they work, and I don't typically have drips, but you've got to be careful. Remember that beautiful black lacquer in these machines will dissolve instantly if you get alcohol on the paint. So because I'm using basically it's a pointed, narrow Q-tip, I know that I've done it enough that I can do it without dripping, but always take extra care when you're working on your machine. And if you need to, you know, cover your machine with rag, make sure you don't get alcohol on that gorgeous lacquer, because you will hurt the lacquer severely. Let's see. Okay, folks, I am now going to turn my attention to the hand wheel itself. And of course, this is the primary thing that was causing it to be kind of stuck. What I want to do is very carefully, with my cotton swabs, I'm going to be cleaning the old oil grease, which has now become kind of a glue. I'm going to clean that off, and then I'm going to look at the gear here, inspect it. The gear looks fine. Like I say, I've been incredibly impressed with how these gears have basically held up over the years. And what I'll do is, if I were to see any really caked on grease here, I can take a tool that has a smooth end. It's not a sharp end, and I can go in here and clean out the grooves. But the grooves are really not full of grease. It's been a while since it's been greased, so it needs some. And of course, one thing to point out, I think I may have mentioned this in my toolbox video a ways back, is that I have different types of grease. I use that synthetic grease that you've seen me talk about in the tool video when I do gears that are metal touching metal gears. And I find that you can use thicker grease and it won't sling around as much. But when it comes to certain parts of a machine, if it's a potted motor and I'm dealing with bearings, I only use the grease that is closest to what Singer originally used. And this is in the red and white and pink tube. It will say Singer lubricant, and it's it's kind of a thin grease, and it's actually the closest thing I can get to what Singer originally specified. And the other reason I want to use this is because this grease has been used, or this type of grease, as close as we can get to it, has been used on Textilite, which touches the metal part of the worm gear in the motor since the machines were made. And these gears have tolerated it and don't seem to mind it a bit. So that's why I don't like to experiment with new greases when it comes to things like the chemistry of the grease, because I don't want to experiment with any other grease. And again, the Singer lubricant's very easy to find. A lot of sewing stores carry it, believe it or not. So it's a convenient thing to get. It's not expensive, and it will be really helpful. So how am I going to do this? I don't technically need to remove the grease here, right? Because it's not really doing anything. I can, if I had a bunch built up, sometimes I find a bunch in this little space right underneath the gear, and I could do that. Now, notice I'm using these tapered cotton swabs. I don't want the cotton or the alcohol in the cotton to touch the gear, and I don't want my cotton swab to get all shredded and cotton hairs sticking to the gear. I don't want that at all. So I'm coming in, and because I'm using the tapered version of a cotton swab here, I can basically get in this spot, and it's not really touching anywhere I don't want it to. And as I keep going around, I'm pulling more of the old grease off, filling up. As you guys can see, I go through so many cotton swabs. I should start buying them in massive bulk. And like I say, there is some old grease right in here at the edge of the gear. I can take my, I have a different tool than the ones you saw before. This tool is, I'm trying to remember where I found this. I don't know if it was I see it in sewing notions collections, and it's a hook used for, it may just be for grabbing threads. Anyway, it has a rounded turned end, so that end is not super sharp. And so I'm going to take that, I'll show you, and again, you want to be very careful, and I can literally go around the edge here if I want to pull. I don't really have a ton of grease on the edge of the gear here. Nothing is really, interfering with the gear at all. The gear seems to be happy doing its thing. And again, if I have any massive clumps, there's some that came off on there. If I have a lot of old grease, I want to get it out so I have room for the new. But this machine was not terrible in that regard, so I'm not really worried about that. What I am focused on, however, is this end here, because this is what was causing it to stick in the opening there. Again, it was just old grease, and when grease sits for a long time, it takes a long time for that to happen, but it can oxidize to a point. It never really fully oxidizes, but it certainly can enough to make things stick. And when I overhaul machines, you can overhaul a machine and never take the handwheel off unless, well, obviously, many times you have to put on a new belt, and other times you have to get access to your direct motors. But some people don't, and the only problem with that is, the longer that handwheel sits there, I mean, this thing may have been on here for 40 years before I took it off. So in some ways, it's very forgiving. But anyway, the point of all this is to say that by getting this old, now glue-like, it looks like grease and maybe a little oil with it, I don't know. But you can see it coming off of here. And again, the little cotton swabs give me control. I can hold alcohol on the swab, and again, as long as you don't just totally submerge it, it holds on to the alcohol pretty well without dripping, and that's important. Okay, obviously you're going to have to use your judgment on how much alcohol you can't just drop the swab down in the alcohol and leave it; it'll come out dripping. But they hold fluid pretty well, because I can't overemphasize this enough. You definitely do not want your machine to come in contact with alcohol when it comes to the paint. It will not forgive you, and you will not like it. Okay, so I'm going around here. I'm just going around. Again, this is, you know, it's not particularly difficult to do. Just be patient. And again, for me, this is kind of a, I like to think of this as a Zen experience, because then I can justify the fact that I'm not in a hurry doing it. This machine has waited a long time for its overhaul. I don't need to rush it. When you rush, you can end up creating problems for yourselves, or more problems than the machine had originally. And it's just not necessary. It really is not. Now, I want to stress here, the point here is not to, I'm not going to take this rim, I'm not going to be polishing it, and you know, this is not for aesthetics. And it's not a part of the machine that you would see anyway. I do this because it has a practical purpose. Cleaning this old stuff off, I'm going to have new grease I'm going to put around it, and it'll be fine. Okay, so there'll be, and I'll show you how much I put, because that's another thing I wanted to mention here, is that some people, they go a little crazy with grease, and I'll explain, you know, how do you know when you have enough, right? How do you know when it's too much? We'll talk about that. And then I'm going to actually take my cotton swab and just kind of run it around the inner bushing, I guess you'd call this, of the, or the inner hub of the hand wheel. And you can see, you know, there's some old stuff that comes off of there. That was probably holding it on too. I typically see more on the wheel shaft than I do the actual drive shaft. It looks pretty good. If you look closely, you'll see there's a yellow tinge to the threads of the drive shaft, and that's just old oil. And that in and of itself, I'm not going to, you know, put a bunch of alcohol in that. I don't want it dripping on the machine. What I have found is that simply adding 1-2 drops on the threads, that alone is going to help the clutch knob go back on with no problem. You can check your clutch knob too. I don't typically see any real problems with it. There's a little staining there, but nothing that's really going to interfere with its function. If there is, you would definitely want to get the grease out. And I'll take a look. I don't really see anything in there that it is an issue. And it's kind of funny. I want to mention this too. When you have old grease and oil on a part, if it's not a part that is coming in contact with anything, and it's not on the outside, you actually can leave the old grease or oil there if you choose to, and it actually acts as a bit of a sealer to seal out moisture, because some of the hard steel components of these machines were not painted, and they were not plated with nickel like the exterior hardware was. And I have found that, you know, it's an aesthetic question. If you really want all of the old stuff off, and we'll look at that when we go underneath, you can do that, but you want to put a film of clean sewing oil on there, because that's going to help seal any of your steel parts. It helps protect them against moisture. Okay, so I don't really have any grease in these little gear slots per se. If I did, I would take, and again, be very careful the tool you choose. I've got this one with a very, it doesn't look like it, but the end of this is rounded and smooth. It's not sharp. And I'm going to take it from the smooth side, and I could pull it, for example, through the little slots of the gears. And there's, you know, a tiny bit, but not enough that I really need to worry over. Now, while I'm here, I can take and I can clean this inner rim. Again, this is not, it doesn't really show on a Singer 301, but I'll go ahead and do that while we're here. And the best thing I'm going to use, I'm just going to use, like I said, just a little bit of sewing machine oil. I'll put a few drops on there. Sewing machine oil is, I go through that and cotton swabs more than anything, because they really, they have so many uses other than their original intended uses. Now you can use what you have. You might want to use, if it's heavily soiled, this one really isn't, you can take a paper towel, and you'll see stuff coming off on the paper towel. If it's not that heavily soiled, I like to use, you know, like a little Kleenex. Kleenex is a little stronger than toilet tissue, but the Kleenex is softer, right? And it'll give you sometimes a little bit better shine. So there you go. So that's, look, I just took sewing machine oil and boom. And one thing to point out too, one of the ways you will know you have a direct drive machine if you haven't seen the motor is that there is no groove, right? This is not a belt groove. Normally on a hand wheel you have a groove for the belt, but of course this machine never used a belt, so there is no groove. Okay, so again, taking our Singer lubricant, and we are now getting ready for the lubrication phase of this machine. But this is how I go about cleaning, guys. You have basically seen me clean the dust and any old grease from both the motor gear, which didn't really have any on it, and the hand wheel gear. So next video, we will I'll break it into different sections for you all so you don't have such a long video to watch. And the next one, we will start lubricating the machine. And again, I may have some backup steps I need to perform, but that is essentially it. One thing you can do too while your hand wheel is off is there's a section in here you can get to more easily, and again mostly just dust and old grease that's found its way down here. Sometimes you look at machines and you might think, wow, you know, why did people stick pins on them? And well, you have to remember these were appliances. They were expensive. And they did take great care of them, at least the original owners did. But they were things that people needed. They were tools, you know. They were not precious collectibles as many of them are today. The Singer 301 is, and in black particularly, and it's, like I say, it's purely an aesthetic difference. So there you go, everyone. You can see, looking at my bobbin winding tire. This tire is in remarkable condition, and it even has the name Singer on it. I'll be taking it off and testing how pliable it is, but it still feels great. Like I said, when a machine has been in a case, it can sometimes, depending on how it was treated in its life, come out almost like it was never used, you know? And that's pretty incredible. But every machine, whether it looks pretty like this one or if it's rougher or has scratches and so forth, they all need to be gone through, because if a machine has sat for decades, even if it was in a nice, safe place, machines need to be used, and if they're not, they need to be fully gone through with every system as I'm showing you all. So don't be sort of misled by machines that look pretty. They all require overhaul if they have not had it. And then once they have the overhaul, they are ready to work and perform and to help you do really beautiful stuff on your sewing projects. So there you go, guys. You are looking at a cleaner part of the 301. So as I mentioned before, let me turn the machine back and I'll kind of sort of restate all of this. I may clean that washer while I'm at it. Not really dirty, just kind of get some of the old grease off there. So again, systematically top to bottom, I've gotten all the old grease off of here, and I forgot to mention to you, I don't really see any old grease underneath per se. There is, not really. I'm not really seeing anything. A little excess grease that kind of got kicked up on the frame, but again, that's not a problem. This machine does not have a lot of old stuff. Yeah, that's why I was ready to end the video. There's not really anything here to clean off, nothing excessive. But again, next video, I will take you all through lubricating the machine, and I'll show you the difference between a restorer's lubrication for a machine that has sat and the lubrication that you would normally perform when you have a machine that's humming really well and you're sewing with it and you just want to keep it running. So there you go, folks. Thanks for watching. I just wanted to do, again, this video is part of a series where I take all of you through just the different sections. If you approach sewing machine restoration in terms of areas of the machine, it can be less daunting. You can say, well, you know what, today I'm going to work on the needle and pressure bar area. I want to clean that, check it out. You know, people are very busy. Sometimes they get, you know, you certainly can't sit down and just do a full restoration. I never have. I cannot sit down and in one day do a whole restoration. There's too much going on, too many hours involved. You may be able to do that, but I don't. I do it in sections so that every part of the machine gets an equal amount of love and treatment as it gets ready for its new life. So anyway, I appreciate you all watching. If you have questions about how I go about restoring machines generally, and I use this process for every machine model I restored, no matter what brand, put your thoughts or questions down in the comment box, and I will see you in the next installment of this series.